Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest today is Eric Fisher, PhD. He's called Dr. E. He's a licensed psychologist, an author, and a media consultant. He's a leading emotional dynamics expert. He's been working with children, teens, and adults for over 2 decades, helping to improve their lives. So again, psychologist, media consultant, and author. So we're going to hear about his unique and creative approach to the work. So welcome, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be on the show.
Yeah. Just before we start, I want to ask you about your background. But what is leading emotional dynamics? What is that, first of all?
Well, for about 30 years now, time flies. I've been, doing a lot of work and looking at the ways we look at power and really trying to help people understand that there's a purpose to emotions. And as we look at the ways we look at power in our culture, and we look at, to me, healthier ways to look at the role of power and how emotions play into it, it really helps people change the perspectives that they have on those issues. So I always say that every emotion has a purpose, and this is the concept of emotional specificity that I teach. So emotions are there to teach us things, tell us things, show us things, do things for us, and or help us do things for ourselves. And when people start to understand the specific nature of each emotion and what it is singularly there to do, then we can help them sort through those complexities in why they're doing what they're doing, why they feel what they feel, and even in the development of their attitude and belief systems that brought them to where they're at in life.
Well, what kind of problems do people come to you for help on? And, how do you decide, all right, this is the way to help them?
Well, a lot of people come with diagnostic issues. They're often looking at, am I depressed? Am I anxious? Or, what's going on with me? And I often say, I don't want you to focus on the diagnosis, because when people often focus on the diagnosis, they often then will say, I am this. And when we say I am semantically, I'm very much a stickler on semantics as well. And when they say I am that, it becomes their identity. And I want people to see that even our diagnostics are usually indicative of primary emotions and then secondary and tertiary emotions that are affecting that really come from different places in time that we're stuck. So when somebody comes in and they have symptoms that look like anxiety, I say the core emotion of anxiety is helplessness. The core emotion of depression is hopelessness. So, and I call anxiety, and depression, the core of them is from a different core emotion in that, but helplessness and hopelessness are cousins in that helplessness's core is fear and hopelessness's core is pain. So from that, what we're starting to look at is how our emotions are often related to things that we really haven't been taught in the past. And that's why we have to then go back and look at the ways we look at power. So when people are coming into the office for the first time, usually in going through a presentation, I talk about that in my podcast, Emotional Algebra, where we're talking about the hierarchical model that our world is, to me, based in, and the equity model of power that I feel like we really come from. And when we understand the issues of hierarchy wants to have power over, equity seeks power with, and then we see how we've categorized our emotions through those different models of power, then we can often find solutions. So when we do this, a lot of times people realize that their diagnoses that they've been looking to understand for so long are really secondary to the emotions, their attitude towards emotions, their beliefs, the different interactions between multiple emotions. And then often those issues are falling away because it's about helping them gain understanding at more of a micro level rather than looking at the macro level of this diagnosis that often they've been on multiple medications on, or people tell them they have to fix this or do this about it. I'm like, it's not about that. Let's go to this micro level of looking at these different emotions to help you understand what brought you here.
So what would be an example? Someone, let's say they get depressed periodically, it seems to be random every 6 weeks or whatever it happens to them. Like what do you think could be going on, for instance?
Well, even what I talk about is that, the theories that I've developed actually tie to quantum physics and energy, in fragmented energy, that to me, we come to this world as this sphere of energy. And as we experience life, we have different life experiences that we feel emotions with. I think with every experience we have, we experience at least one emotion. So let's say we're an infant and we get picked up and loved on and fed and hugged and all that stuff. Well, most of the time we're going to feel happy. We're going to feel loved. We're going to feel accepted. We just don't necessarily have words for that yet. Now, let's say I'm an infant who doesn't get picked up, doesn't feel loved, goes hungry. So I start to feel sadness. I start to feel abandoned. I start to feel rejected. I feel confused, unloved, doubt. So I have all these emotions that I don't have words for while I'm there. My attitudes and beliefs I have towards the world are being affected. Then as I grow up, I have different experiences. So when I'm often working with people who I'm helping them understand where those feelings of depression, anxiety come from, I always say that the times in life where we have those issues and emotions, often we stay stuck in them. And that's that idea of emotional fragmenting. So the way I look at it in terms of quantum physics is we date the age of a star when enough energy came together, enough elements came together to create this separate entity from the rest of the universe that might have been a loosely formed nebula. And then it became the star because of the bonding issues that happened between those elements and the gravitational forces. And in that, yes, it sounds big, but it's really simple, because when we stay stuck at these times and places and ages when experiences happened. So when I'm asking people, what age do you feel? There might be multiple situations. In other words, by the time they're an adult, they have constellations of emotions, beliefs, and attitudes. Because what a belief system becomes is a combination of experiences that came with emotions that we pull together to create the outcomes that we start to see the world by. So again, in breaking those pieces down into the micro, then we often help people to see where all these things come from. And therefore, we're getting to that level of emotional specificity in primary and secondary and tertiary emotions. And that's why I talk about the concept of emotional algebra, because it's about figuring out the variables, the attitudes, the beliefs, the perceptions that have led to our perceived outcomes in life that then lead us to our diagnostic issues. So in that, what I often say about diagnostics is basically their emotional disruptions. So looking at quantum physics and physics in general, once an object has been placed in motion, it remains in motion until acted upon by an equal and opposite force. So if I have an emotion that's fear-based or pain-based, and it's been placed in motion, it's not going to return to its resting state until it's been acted upon from a place of love, acceptance, understanding, respect, peace.
What does that mean? Like if I'm feeling anxious about a test at school, but what do you do with that? Let's say I always get really, really anxious about school, and it causes me to, even though I know the material, when I go to the tests, I screw them up because I'm just so anxious. What would you do to help me?
So step one is to ask that, really help that person feel, what are all the emotions going on with that? So remember, core of anxiety is helplessness. So what are the things that you feel helpless about? And they might say, well, I feel helpless about failing. Okay, so you feel failure. Helplessness is a fear-based emotion too. So what do you do before that test? Is say, well, I think about it all night. I worry about it all night. Well, worry is there to help us to look at the things we might need to look at and really prompts us to action. But what people often do when they worry is they start spinning their wheels and they just feel like, well, if I'm worrying about it, I'm doing something about it. I'm like, no, worry wants action. And even before we worry, we often feel concerned. Concerned is the first step that says you might want to do something about this or you might not have good outcomes. So when we start to look at the collection of helplessness, worry, concern, maybe fear, and then self-doubt. And doubt lets us know when we want to ask more questions. Confusion comes with that. Confusion wants to ask more information. Now, failure is a pain-based emotion. Failure says it's time to learn. But if we're not learning from the issues of previous tests we've taken, then we're going to continue to repeat the same pattern over and over. Now, beyond that, as we identify the emotions, then I'm asking people, again, now what age do you feel? And often at first they're like, what do you mean, what age do I feel? So I say, just quiet yourself and just feel inside that feeling of helplessness, that feeling of anxiety. What age do you feel? Then they might go back to, oh, I feel like I'm 5 years old. Okay, what happened at 5 years old? Well, I went away to school. I went to kindergarten. And how did you feel when that happened? I felt really afraid. Why did you feel afraid? Because I didn't have support, So we're starting to help them to track back to see what we call affect bridges. Affect meaning emotion and bridge meaning connection. So we're looking at the connections through time that often people aren't looking at where the core issue of this comes from. And even at 5 years old, we might say, okay, now you're 5 years old. Now what do you feel? And I might say, well, now I feel like, I'm feeling my parents they're critiquing me. They're telling me I did something wrong, And how did you feel when they did something wrong? Well, they used to yell at me and they used to tell me I was stupid. And how did you feel when you felt stupid? So in this process, we're breaking the macro into the micro, not only of feelings, but of these series of events that happen over time. So often when we're doing that, they're seeing these connections. Now that's at a conscious level. So what I also do a lot of work with, I do work with hypnosis, because to me, it's not just about consciously understanding, it's a transformative process. And what I mean by transformative process is when you become conscious of these different ages, times, places that you felt stuck, then the next piece we want to do is help you to go back to those parts of you stuck in time and bring them into the present, bring them into a place where you become either the parent, the big brother, the guide, the supportive to these parts of you that have been fragmented. I say they're fragmented in time. And that's when often, again, you see this transformation of people's emotional issues and the anxieties. So I've had people, like I said, who come in 2 or 3 or 4 different medications. And as we're helping them to see where they've been stuck in time and where these disruptions have occurred, then often they're seeing themselves take fewer and fewer medications, get off the medications. Because if you look at the word disease, it means dis-ease. So when we heal those underlying emotional dis-eases, we're often changing the function of disease, which is to let us know something's not right inside. And we want to help it return to that resting state or restore that person to a place of, more healthy homeostasis.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
So what kind of feedback do you get when you're in session doing this with somebody? What are some things that people have told you that were surprising or encouraging or, indicative that it's working?
It's seeing the things change in their life around them. It's seeing the, patterns of nightmares that they used to have change, or again, test anxiety, the anxieties they had when they go into these experiences, they feel different. They feel lighter. They understand, and that's for a lot of people. First, I always tell people when they come in that I will stand behind you shining a path light, a flashlight down all the paths you can take in your life. And I want to help you to take those paths, and we'll talk about along the way, because I see myself as a guide, not somebody who wants to give you the answers, but help you find the answers. And when you give people a model to come from, and you help to give them structure, they respond better. You know, a lot of therapies that I hear about, and a lot of people come in and they say, they've often been to 2 or 3 or 4 other therapists. They say, all I did was sit in there and they just expected me to talk and I didn't know what to talk about. And what they often find is when we come in and do the work here is, like I said, my first attempt is let's give you structure. Let's give you a model that we can both talk about. And even when I'm working with somebody, I'm saying, now go home and feel free to explain this to people who support you in your life. And if you want them to come in, we'll talk about it together so that they can talk about these common issues and have a common language. A lot of people, when they come in with issues, they don't have the language to communicate it with. They don't understand emotions. When I talk about the models of power in terms of hierarchical models and equity-based models, hierarchical models are, like I said, everybody is a different size circle from the big circle to the little circle. So that's that idea of having power over. In that model of power, I say we have 4 dichotomies: good and bad, right and wrong, strong and weak, and win and lose. So most people want to get to the win. Well, how do we get to the win? But by looking good and or strong and or right. Well, when you think about diagnostics in our culture, people who feel anxious, depressed, crazy, overwhelmed, all these things, they see themselves as bad and wrong and weak because they've identified themselves often, instead of as these are emotions that I feel, as this is who I am. So when we separate them from who they are to how they are, and why are they behaving that way, because of the emotions they feel that they don't understand, and then we teach them equity, which is about balance, which is that we all have different gifts, strengths, weaknesses, wisdom, handicaps, experience, knowledge, and understanding. That's where we find balance. So we're giving them something to work for, and we're giving them identifiable goals, structure, strategies, and a platform to really find something that they're growing for. And that's where people like to be goal-oriented. People like to, like I said, have understanding and definition, where, you know, I often say, when I can have done a lot of work on the media, the CNNs, Foxes, and things for 20 years or so, the reason they used to bring me in is because my goal was always bring calm to the chaos and sanity to the insanity. So the reason I developed this whole concept of emotional algebra to extend to that was to really help people to see the variables. So sometimes I might go on the board in my office and we'll say, okay, let's look at the variables that you have: history, beliefs, attitudes, emotions, the present day stuff, the people around you in relationships. These are all your variables. Now, what's the relationship between those variables? So we start to kind of create these, you know, esoteric equations that really help them to see, oh, this is what's going on I didn't grasp. I now see the influence of the past on the present. People with test anxiety and things like that are usually only focused on the test. They're not focused on the origin of the anxiety because they want to fix the problem now. And they don't realize that the problem now is because of unresolved issues then. So again, as we're breaking it down in these variables and giving them something to work toward, then that's where you start to see that process that they say, okay, now that I understand it, now I'm ready to work on the deeper issues and understand and help me to find those parts of me that are stuck in time. And then as we find those parts that are stuck in time, whether it's just by doing a visualization, a meditation, or doing the hypnotic work, then, you know, we start to find that transformative process. And even then, I've started doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy because some people really benefit from feeling like they're going into a deeper state and deeper place through a medication moderated experience.
What happened with ketamine-assisted therapy? Do you give them an injection or an infusion and talk to them while they're in that state?
Yeah, I work with a doctor that administers the ketamine. The nurses, they're monitored, their heart rate's monitored. They're, you know, all the proper monitors. So I don't do, the only thing I do with the ketamine is once they're in the ketamine assisted state, then I'm basically asking them to go where they need to go. So whenever I do hypnotic work with people or ketamine-assisted work, I'm asking their subconscious to help take them to whatever time, place, memory, emotion, experience, attitude, belief, perception, or event. The belief or the knowledge of doing this work for more than 30 years is that our unconscious often knows exactly where we need to go and when we need to go to find our healing. So that the experiences, the memories, the events. I was working with somebody once and we did some hypnotic work, and they just went to a place where they said, I'm just sitting with myself and I'm talking with myself. And this other part of me is telling me that I really want to slow down and look at these different issues. And I want to realize that when I'm only focused on what I'm feeling, I'm missing the relationships I have with people. Other times I've had people go back to specific memories where they felt stuck, relive those experiences where they're stuck. And why are they reliving them? Because of that fragmented energy model, as I said, is they're stuck in that time. And that time is reliving those experiences. So when I'm doing ketamine work, I'm telling people, when you get on the ketamine bus, you are on the ketamine bus until basically it lets you off, because that is a drug moderated state that is going to last depending on the amount of the infusion. So the amount of the dose and the duration of the fusion, it's going to last a certain amount of time. If they want it to stop, that infusion can stop. But even then, it's going to take a while until the drug is metabolized for them to come back and be present. So what I saw through that is some people who would just do the ketamine work on their own, if they get stuck in a past memory or an emotion that they couldn't handle, then it was pretty overwhelming. So that's where, again, I saw the value of having guidance and support in that, in not directing it, but being there to support them and allowing them the avenue to work things through. So I had somebody a while ago who came in, and after we did the work and helped them, just guided them through it, they had been through multiple sessions without guidance. And then they asked if I could help them. After one session, they said, I have had this pain and pressure in my chest ever since I was a kid, and it's gone. It's just gone. And that's because what came up that we helped them to heal and bring into, what I call their light, their place of unconditional love and acceptance and healing, they understood it and they brought it to a better place. And therefore it wasn't stuck inside of their chest, physiologically. So the issue with that is often our emotional issues are manifested through physiological symptoms. And that's what I often want to help people to release or realize, like I said, is that idea of dis-ease leads to disease.
Makes sense. What is ketamine used for? Is it people with depression? Is it people with PTSD? Like, what is it effective for and what is it not effective for?
It's really been found to, they were using it a lot with people with addictions. They were using it with people of what are called medication-resistant depressions, which means that the medications just aren't working anymore. So sometimes people who might feel suicidal, it's not indicated for people who might have a tendency towards psychotic behavior, but they're finding it's useful in a lot of different situations. I always tell people though, so, when we have our conscious mind is focused on the present. Its job is to help us to exist and survive, and then beyond that, thrive and succeed. If our conscious mind has issues of distress, well, it's going to then try to call in the unconscious mind or resources in the unconscious mind to help it deal with stress. So it often looks at assessments of the future based on appraisals of the past to make decisions in the present. But what happens when our unconscious mind and parts and pieces are stuck in time that feel distress, that have imbalanced emotions, and the perceptions of emotions that they have are often leading to negative outcomes? Well, then they're going to develop defenses. Those defenses are insulation between our conscious mind and unconscious, and our conscious mind and the outside world. So those defenses will color the way that we look at the world and color the way that we look at ourselves. Often want to control what comes out from the insides. Our conscious mind wants to pick and choose what it wants to use so that we can look as good and right and strong as possible so we can be seen as winners. So in that, when we're looking at ketamine, often I'm telling people, if your defenses are in place and they're between the conscious and unconscious mind, they still might stay in place when we're doing the ketamine work. So a lot of people come and doing the ketamine work, whether they have addictive issues, anxiety issues, depression issues, and are, really wanting to look at some of the deeper motivations for their psychological issues. I continue to find that their defenses will still control the effect during ketamine, just like they control the effect during even the hypnotic interventions. So being able to understand the role of our defenses and what they're trying to do for us, which is often to try to protect us and help us look as good as we can, we then have to look at understanding what those defenses are about, where they come from, why they're there. So it's a multidimensional, multifaceted approach. And my goal is always to help people realize they have the resources inside, and while understanding the things that they learned and the way they viewed the world that were really unhealthy or unproductive or maladaptive to the ways that they're seeing themselves in the context of the world.
Well, what are some of the common defenses that you've seen? How do they manifest?
Well, there's cognitive defenses. So I look at the difference between cognitive defenses and emotional defenses. So cognitive defenses are like rationalization, justification, minimization, denial, projection. Those are things that Freud was one of the first people to really talk about, those idea of defenses, and there have been more developed since then. But primarily people who want to stay in their head and not feel emotions because they see most emotions as bad and wrong and weak, they develop more cognitive or logical emotions, and they're going to stay in that denial, rationalization, justification, minimization. And then I say their emotional defenses. Our 7 primary emotional defenses, which are there to protect us, are anger, rage, arrogance, flippancy, defiance, sarcasm, and hatred. So remember, in the beginning, I said emotions are trying to teach us things, tell us things, show us things, do things for us, or help us do things for ourselves. Defensive or protective emotions that I just mentioned are doing emotions. They do things for us. They try to protect us when we feel minimally threatened. So what's the purpose of anger? It protects me when I feel at least threatened. Rage protects me when I feel in fear of my life or my integrity feels threatened. Arrogance protects me with the shield of false pride. Defiance protects me by helping me hold on to the power I have. Flippancy protects me with the shield of not feeling. So that shield of flippancy has multiple levels. It says, if I don't care, then I don't feel. If I don't feel, then I don't hurt. If I don't hurt, then you can hurt me. If you can't hurt me, I can't lose. If I can't lose, then I must win. And we have hatred. Hatred pushes us away from things that we feel have caused us pain, are causing us pain, and or could cause us pain. So hatred is past, present, and future oriented, sometimes simultaneously. So like I said, when we understand the equity-based purpose of those emotions in their singular specificity, then we can start to see, so no experience has a singular emotion. They come with multiple emotions, and then they come in different orders and sequence. So fear lets us know when we need protection. So that's why when I talk about fear-based emotions, we have worry, concern, helplessness, terror, panic, overwhelmed. We have confusion and doubt to me are fear-based. And each of those, like I said, are one color in that spectrum of fear. Pain-based emotions are like hopelessness, sadness, betrayal, violated, emotions like that. So each of those have their singular purpose. So that's where when we understand what our defenses are trying to do, and they want us to often help us to look strong when we feel weak and or bad or wrong inside. That's why I say I don't spend a lot of time focusing on the defenses, because when you take care of what those defenses are trying to protect, then often the defenses are not needed as much. So when I do work with people who have anger management problems, I don't focus on anger, because anger is just trying to do its job. And when anger doesn't have to work so hard, then it can relax, it can let go, it doesn't have to fight with the world. And then because it's just trying to protect the self.
Well, anger seems to be easier to deal with than like despair or, self-pity or, people with depression, from what I've seen, they don't want to do anything. They're not motivated. They're like a bump on a log. The anger seems productive, or could be productive if focused. What do you do with just sadness and depression and apathy?
Well, again, I think part of that is, again, sadness lets us know when you feel pain. Sadness is the emotional version of our neurons, our pain-based neurons that help us know when we've been, scratched or punched or hit, and that's what sadness is there to tell us. And there's all, again, different types of pain-based emotions that are there. So minimally, when you have depression, you're going to have hopelessness. And hopelessness, like I said, is pain-based, so they're also going to be feel sad. So then we have sadness often, then there's going to be failure. Failure, like I said, tells us when it's time to learn. And often when we feel failure, multiple failures is going to be stupid. Stupid, I say, is failure times X. So as we start to separate that depression into these multiple emotions, and then with that is going to come overwhelmed. The purpose of overwhelm is it says back up and look at all these parts and pieces that are making up these feelings of this manifested depression. So again, as we're doing that, we're breaking this complex issue into the simple, into the parts and pieces. And then they're able to see it like from their histories, from the emotions that came from those histories, then from the attitudes and beliefs that develop, which get into, a cognitive level, cognitive behavior, talk about that stinking thinking, that then lead to the antecedents, in other words, the thoughts that precede the behavior that lead to the consequences. And then we're able to look at their relationships and how the relationships and their approach to relationships that come in. Now, the other thing we have to look at is the intersection between neurochemistry, which you do have genetic predispositions to depression and to anxiety, so there are genetic issues. But what I also find is when you deal with these issues of the stressors, and that's what's contributed to what's called the diathesis stress model of disease. It says people have genetic predispositions to manifest certain disease structures, and you take care of the stressors, then often those disease manifestations abate. In other words, somebody might have a predisposition under stress to feel depressed. And when we take care of and help them understand all the factors that led to that depression, then the depression abates. It feels better. So this is, again, breaking the complex into the simple, looking at the simple and all these different pieces and parts, understand the possible influence of genetics. Now, also the other piece is that much of our neurochemistry is created in our gut. I can't tell you how many people that I've helped realize that they have gut issues. In other words, the things they're eating or other metabolic issues or unidentified issues. There are people I've seen, I can't count, who actually had sensitivities to yeast. Yeast growth, that it grows unchecked throughout the body that they have a reaction to, competes with glucose. Our brain feeds off glucose. So when you have the brain competing with these yeast structures that are growing within our tissues and in our muscles and through our body that are out of control, then you're going to affect how the brain can function. You're going to have brain fog. It's going to affect apathy. It's going to affect attitude. It's going to affect sleep. It's going to affect what I'm hungry for or how I eat. It has all these multiple influences on the different systems in our body. So that's where, even when I do the work I do, and we're looking at emotions, I'm also looking at nutrition. I'm looking at neurochemistry. I'm looking at genetics. Sometimes I'm looking at brain functioning through using quantitative electroencephalogram technology. I have a neuropsychologist friend of mine, buddy of mine, I refer people to get that, because we really have to understand not just on the surface what brought you in, but I want to help people have permanent solutions. I don't want to put a Band-Aid on a cancer and send them home. Because yes, what I do helps give people strategies, but often what I found is they're going to come back again if you don't find the root of the issue. So there's multiple reasons why people experience the depressions, the anxieties, even psychotic issues and or personality issues, attachment issues. ADD can be related to neurochemistry or to diet or to just anxiety. Anxiety in kids looks like ADD. Anxiety or depression in kids can look like ADD. Trauma can look like ADD. So understanding all these variables that brought this emotional algebra to solutions they have to help them produce different outcomes or find different solutions is really important to look at all these pieces.
It's an integrated approach. When people work with you, do they have to be willing to do all the things that are necessary, or are they okay to just do the psychotherapy part? Let's say they don't want to do diet. They don't want to do ketamine. They just want, talk therapy with you.
Oh,
do you allow them, or is it necessary to do all of this together?
No, I never force anybody to do anything. Because sometimes, I always tell people I'm also, pretty spiritual in the approach I take underneath everything. And I say life happens for us, not to us. And if it's necessary for you to walk down this path to try this therapeutic approach and you get some relief from it, great. If then you feel like you've completed something and you want to go live your life and then you come back to this whole thing, sometimes, that definition of insanity is people do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. So I'll say whenever you're ready, there's people I do a lot of work with who just don't want to do the hypnotic work. I'm like, okay, then let's continue to focus on strategies. Let's continue to focus on understanding these other variables in your life and helping to give you cognitive skills, where you're at and how to help you to continue to progress. Sometimes people don't have the money to do the QEEGs or to see the integrative medicine people and to look at some of these other medical issues. Sometimes we'll just say, work on your diets. And sometimes when I look at even addictions, I always say that your addiction is like a friend to you. This is a part of you inside of you that if you listen to the self-talk, will often say, hey, dude, you need me. Let's hang out. I've been there every time you needed me, and there's nobody in your life has been there for you. So often when we're helping people to understand these issues, I'm wanting them to see these thoughts and attitudes and beliefs as really almost living energy that speaks to them. It's not about hearing voices. It's about hearing the self-talk. So when I do addiction work with people and they start to see, yeah, there is like this voice. I'm like, so how would they feel if we wanted to get rid of them? Because often people want to get rid of their addictions. In other words, they want to destroy that energy. Well, what do we know about the first law of energy? You can't destroy it. You got to change its form. So we want to shift what that energy is doing, and we want to shift its role. So in addictions, if that addiction came to help that person to feel connected to people or to deal with stress or to escape challenges, and we say, okay, let's have you do that, but in a different way through exercise or through self-talk or towards not feeling like you have to survive, but seeing a different way that you can see that you're here to thrive in life, then we're starting to shift what that part of them does, how they did it, and why they do what they do. So I'm always willing and wanting to adapt to where people are at and what they're ready to do and what they're willing to do. Because if somebody doesn't want to do something, it doesn't matter what I tell them to do, they're not going to do it. So that's what we have to understand is our own, free will, and really these parts and pieces of us inside that we're not even conscious of us that are really running the show. And that's another thing I teach people is that the need for control is always based in fear. And there are parts and pieces of us that have voracious appetites for control because they feel so afraid for things to change in their life.
What are some, many interesting case studies, without naming names, of course, of how you've helped people?
I really enjoy working with people with dissociative identity disorders, in other words, multiple personalities. That's really what led me working with people with those issues to develop the theories that I had about us all having parts and pieces. It's just the degree of often trauma that people had at early ages. And even I think there's genetic predispositions for people to deal with stress by fragmenting those parts. So when I worked with people with dissociative identities, those identities would even have their own conscious and unconscious. And I saw the core, what I began to realize is that each identity had its core emotion and usually its core experience. And that emotion sometimes would be rage or fear or shame or guilt, helplessness, terror, panic. And when I helped each of those alters, as they, our identities, to focus on and see where they came from and when they came from and why and how they were helping the other identities to thrive and or survive. And most often it was about survival and that they wanted to survive. That idea of integration, because the goal of often of work with people with multiple personalities is to reintegrate them into one person, again, one personality. It was to help them to see that my goal isn't to destroy you. My goal is to help you to see your value to the rest. So in working with rage, there's a time I worked decades ago with somebody with an issue with rage, and the rage came out, and it was like they put me away. They buried me inside. And that rage felt as angry at the other alters inside as it did at the person who contributed to their need for rage in the first place. So in that, helping them to see the dimensionality of their issues and of the emotions and of the variables that even created those alters, the unfolding of that and helping rage to see that it felt betrayed, it felt sad, it felt violated, it felt hurt, and it felt really failed, that it failed that person. Rage first had to accept that it could feel anything other than rage. Then it was important to accept that it felt other emotions like the sadness, the failure, the shame, the fear. And then helping rage to perspective take, to see through the eyes of the other parts and pieces inside that felt like if they became rage embodied, they would hurt the person that was hurting them. And they felt that that person would then hurt them back. So there's all this dimensionality of all these variables. And when I saw the interplay of all that, and actually when we helped to heal rage and rage acknowledged that it wouldn't hurt any of the others, it actually came out and became the caretaker for the emotions. So after I helped rage to see that it just wanted to protect them when they were in fear of their life and it loved them enough to potentially sacrifice itself, I said, all you wanted was to love someone and to be loved. And that's when rage paused and said, yeah, that's all I wanted was to love someone and to be loved. And then it picked up shame and put shame in its lap and started to take care of shame and the other emotions that felt weak and bad and wrong and vulnerable. So that was just so powerful to help me learn this multidimensionality of emotions and the relationships between emotions. And that's where my greatest teachers haven't been in books. They've been the people who I've guided, who really guided me. And that's why I always say, as soon as I think I know everything and I can't learn anymore is when I'm going to hurt somebody. And I always tell my people that come to me, I said, you are going to teach me at least one thing and probably more than that. And we're on this journey together.
Well, how has it changed how you interact with people and your emotions and, the issues you have? Do you feel more balanced or?
They became my teachers. One of my, as Freud would say, everybody has their primal wound, their first wound. When I was a kid, my brother died and he was electrocuted and it was just a tragic accident. And that had such a formative effect on me that I didn't realize. I buried a lot of my emotions. I didn't think I was supposed to feel sad. I had to carry on for everybody else. I had to live his life for him. So, I think, the dark days of my soul were in college, as I say. It's the time when it just wasn't working anymore. And I realized that I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I realized I was limited for everybody else. And that's when I got my therapy. And it was, happened in layers. I first had to have that first unfolding and then live some life and go back and look at a little more. So in undergraduate, I first did the first level. Then I figured a lot of things out and found some happiness. And then other things came up. I was in graduate school and I did the next level. And then as I went through life and finished up grad school and other things came up, I did another level. So I think I want people to realize that I always say healing is like a spiral that we're going around. Sometimes people are stuck in a circle. They're stuck in a cycle. If we realize we're going to come back to these same issues in life, and if you come at them like a spiral, you're at a little bit different, higher level. So you see it differently. And that's where life happens for us, is we're here to embrace every emotion, to learn from every emotion, to see their value. And that's what I've really done in life. And that's why I said I look at life very spiritually, that life happens for us, that all these emotions are gifts. They're here to help us understand the purpose of love and the purpose of every emotion as it helps us understand what love is. And that's where, as we understand there's relationships between ourselves, how people outside of us are often our teachers, and they're our students, and our kids are often our greatest teachers, and that even circumstances we find ourselves in again and again aren't to punish us. To me, there are things that are there to teach us again, say, hey, here's another opportunity to learn from something more. Here's another opportunity that you keep doing the same thing over and over and you're not learning the lesson. So when you feel stupid says, hey, back up and assess all these times you felt failure and what are either the same thing you're not learning from or different facets of that issue that you can learn something from each of those different facets. So that's kind of where, like I said, I see life as full of opportunity. I know a lot of people out there today are feeling like the world's falling apart and we're in this place of doom and gloom and our country's falling apart. And I say, no, we're in this cycle to learn something from it. We can either turn away from each other or we can find ways to come together. And as we shift our approaches from equity that's hierarchy that's fear-based and seeking power over, it's always driven by fear, to equity that's love-based, and that we're all in this together and can learn to survive, not just survive, but thrive together as we see our value and worth, we're going to create a much different world out there. First, we have to identify where we're at and start to see that there's a different place that we can go.
All right, well, very good. For our listeners, where can they go to get started on this journey with you?
Well, I do have my podcast, Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. It's on all the major platforms. I'm also going to start to be putting out some, they're called Your Empower Minutes, which will be under the Emotional Algebra with Dr. E, that label. The other thing I've been doing a lot with, I just got into some AI music generators, and I've been using the AI music generation to create songs with people who are going through issues that these amazing platforms create these songs that to me are part of their healing, part of giving direction. So I'm probably going to be even creating a music channel and posting those songs that are being created that are also teaching the concepts that I teach about the value of different emotions, the purpose of different emotions, their relationship. And I'm going to be probably posting those as well on Spotify, YouTube, things like that. So there's a number of different ways that they can get out there. I do have a website, drepresents.com. So that's drepresents.com. But I love people to tune in and subscribe to the podcast and again, continue that journey that we started here today.
Well, very good, Eric. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Well, and thanks for your time. Thanks for the invite, and look forward to following your work in the future as well. It's been very interesting to listen to.
Well, thank you.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else?